This week's Grimm Fairy Tales, The Goose Girl at the Well. There was once upon a time a very old woman who lived with her flock of geese in a waste place among the mountains, and there had a little house. The waste was surrounded by a large forest, and every morning the old woman took her crutch and hobbled into it. There, however, the dame was quite active, more so than anyone would have thought, considering her age, and collected grass for her geese, picked all the wild fruit she could reach, and carried everything home on her back. Anyone would have thought that the heavy load would have weighed her to the ground, but she always brought it safely home. If anyone met her, she greeted him quite courteously. "Good day, dear countryman. It is a fine day. Ah, you wonder that I should drag grass about, but everyone must take his burden on his back." Nevertheless, people did not like to meet her if they could help it, and took by preference a roundabout way, and when a father with his boys passed her, he whispered to them, "Beware of the old woman. She has claws beneath her gloves. She is a witch." One morning, a handsome young man was going through the forest. The sun shone bright, the birds sang, a cool breeze crept through the leaves, and he was full of joy and gladness. He had, as yet, met no one, when he suddenly perceived the old witch kneeling on the ground, cutting grass with a sickle. She had already thrust a whole load into her cloth, and near it stood 2 baskets, which were filled with wild apples and pears. "But, good little mother," said he, "how canst thou carry all that away?" "I must carry it, dear sir," answered she. "Rich folks' children have no need to do such things. But with the peasant folk the saying goes, 'Don't look behind you, you will only see how crooked your back is.' Will you help me?" she said, as he remained standing by her. "You have still a straight back and young legs. It would be a trifle to you. Besides, my house is not so very far from here. It stands there on the heath behind the hill. How soon you would bound up thither?" The young man took compassion on the old woman. "My father is certainly no peasant," replied he, "but a rich count nevertheless, that you may see that it is not only peasants who can carry things. I will take your bundle." "If you will try it," said she, "I shall be very glad. You will certainly have to walk for an hour, but what will that signify to you? Only you must carry the apples and pears as well." It now seemed to the young man just a little serious when he heard of an hour's walk, but the old woman would not let him off, packed the bundle on his back, and hung the 2 baskets on his arm. "See, it is quite light," said she. "No, it is not light," answered the count, and pulled a rueful face. "Verily, the bundle weighs as heavily as if it were full of cobblestones, and the apples and pears are as heavy as lead. I can scarcely breathe." He had a mind to put everything down again, but the old woman would not allow it. "Just look," said she mockingly. "The young gentleman will not carry what I, an old woman, have so often dragged along. You are ready with fine words, but when it comes to be earnest, you want to take to your heels. Why are you standing loitering there?" she continued. "Step out. No one will take the bundle off again." As long as he walked on level ground, it was still bearable, but when they came to the hill and had to climb, the stones rolled down under his feet as if they were alive. It was beyond his strength. The drops of perspiration stood on his forehead, and ran, hot and cold, down his back. "Dame," said he, "I can go no further. I want to rest a little." "Not here," answered the old woman. "When we have arrived at the journey's end, you can rest. But now you must go forward. Who knows what good it may do you?" "Old woman, thou art becoming shameless," said the Count, and tried to throw off the bundle, but he labored in vain. It stuck as fast to his back as if it grew there. He turned and twisted, but he could not get rid of it. The old woman laughed at this and sprang about quite delighted on her crutch. "Don't get so angry, dear sir," said she. "You are growing as red in the face as a turkey cock. Carry your bundle patiently. I will give you a good present when we get home." What could he do? He was obliged to submit to his fate and crawl along patiently behind the old woman. She seemed to grow more and more nimble, and his burden still heavier. All at once she made a spring, jumped onto the bundle, and seated herself on the top of it. And however withered she might be, she was yet heavier than the stoutest country lass. The youth's knees trembled, but when he did not go on, the old woman hit him about the legs with a switch and with stinging nettles. Groaning continually, he climbed the mountain and at length reached the old woman's house. When he was just about to drop, when the geese perceived the old woman, they flapped their wings, stretched out their necks, ran to meet her, cackling all the while. Behind the flock walked, stick in hand, an old wench, strong and big but ugly as night. "Good mother," said she to the old woman, "has anything happened to you? You have stayed away so long." "By no means, my dear daughter," answered she. "I have met with nothing bad, but, on the contrary, with this kind gentleman who has carried my burden for me. Only think, he even took me on his back when I was tired. The way, too, has not seemed long to us. We have been merry and have been cracking jokes with each other all the time." At last, the old woman slid down, took the bundle off the young man's back, and the baskets from his arm, looked at him quite kindly, and said, "Now, seat yourself on the bench before the door, and rest. You have fairly earned your wages, and they shall not be wanting." Then she said to the goose girl, "Go into the house, my dear daughter. It is not becoming for thee to be alone with a young gentleman. One must not pour oil onto the fire. He might fall in love with thee." The Count knew not whether to laugh or to cry. Such a sweetheart as that, thought he, could not touch my heart, even if she were 30 years younger. In the meantime, the old woman stroked and fondled her geese as if they were children, and then went into the house with her daughter. The youth lay down on the bench under a wild apple tree. The air was warm and mild. On all sides stretched a green meadow, which was set with cowslip, wild thyme, and 1,000 other flowers. Through the mists of it rippled a clear brook on which the sun sparkled, and the white geese went walking backwards and forwards, or paddled in the water. "It is quite delightful here," said he, "but I am so tired that I cannot keep my eyes open. I will sleep a little, if only a gust of wind does not come and blow my legs off my body, for they are as rotten as tinder." When he had slept a little while, the old woman came and shook him till he awoke. "Sit up," said she. "Thou canst not stay here. I have certainly treated thee heartily. Still, it has not cost thee thy life. Of money and land thou hast no need. Here is something else for thee." Thereupon she thrust a little book into his hand, which was cut out of a single emerald. "Take great care of it," said she. "It will bring thee good fortune." The Count sprang up, and as he felt that he was quite fresh and had recovered his vigor, he thanked the old woman for her present, and set off without even once looking back at the beautiful daughter. When he was already some way off, he still heard in the distance the noisy cry of the geese. For 3 days the Count had to wander in the wilderness before he could find his way out. He then reached a large town, and as no one knew him, he was led into the royal palace, where the king and queen were sitting on their throne. The Count fell on one knee, drew the emerald book out of his pocket, and laid it at the queen's feet. She bade him rise and hand her the little book. Hardly, however, had she opened it, and looked therein, than she fell as if dead to the ground. The Count was seized by the king's servants, and was being led to prison, when the queen opened her eyes, and ordered them to release him, and everyone was to go out, as she wished to speak with him in private. When the queen was alone, she began to weep bitterly, and said, "Of what use to me are the splendors and honors with which I am surrounded? Every morning I awake in pain and sorrow. I had 3 daughters, the youngest of whom was so beautiful that the whole world looked on her as a wonder. She was as white as snow, as rosy as apple blossom, and her hair as radiant as sunbeams. When she cried, not tears fell from her eyes, but pearls and jewels only. When she was 15 years old, the king summoned all 3 sisters to come before his throne. You should have seen how all the people gazed when the youngest entered. It was just as if the sun were rising." Then the king spoke. "My daughters, I know not when my last day may arrive. I will today decide what each shall receive at my death. You all love me, but the one of you who loves me best shall fare the best." Each of them said she loved him best. "Can you not express to me," said the king, "how much you do love me, and thus I shall see what you mean?" The eldest spoke. "I love my father as dearly as the sweetest sugar." The second, "I love my father as dearly as my prettiest dress." But the youngest was silent. Then the father said, "And thou, my dearest child, how much dost thou love me?" "I do not know, and cannot compare my love with nothing." But her father insisted that she should name something, so she said at last, "The best food does not please me without salt. Therefore I love my father like salt." When the king heard that, he fell into a passion and said, "If thou lovest me like salt, thy love shall also be repaid thee with salt." Then he divided the kingdom between the 2 elder, but caused a sack of salt to be bound on the back of the youngest, and 2 servants had to lead her forth into the wild forest. "We all begged and prayed for her," said the queen, "but the king's anger was not to be appeased. How she cried when she had to leave us! The whole road was strewn with the pearls which flowed from her eyes. The king soon afterwards repented of his great severity, and had the whole forest searched for the poor child, but no one could find her. When I think that the wild beasts have devoured her, I know not how to contain myself for sorrow. Many a time I console myself with the hope that she is still alive, and may have hidden herself in a cave, or has found shelter with compassionate people. But picture to yourself, when I opened your little emerald book, a pearl lay therein, of exactly the same kind as those which used to fall from my daughter's eyes. And then you can also imagine how the sight of it stirred my heart. You must tell me how you came by that pearl." The Count told her that he had received it from the old woman in the forest, who had appeared very strange to him, and must be a witch, but he had neither seen nor heard anything of the queen's child. The king and the queen resolved to seek out the old woman. They thought that there, where the pearl had been, they would obtain news of their daughter. The old woman was sitting in that lonely place at her spinning wheel, spinning. It was already dusk, and a log which was burning on the hearth gave a scanty light. All at once there was a noise outside. The geese were coming home from the pasture, and uttering their hoarse cries. Soon afterwards the daughter also entered, but the old woman scarcely thanked her, and only shook her head a little. The daughter sat down beside her, took her spinning wheel, and twisted the threads as nimbly as a young girl. Thus, they both sat for 2 hours and exchanged never a word. At last something rustled at the window, and 2 fiery eyes peered in. It was an old night owl, which cried, "Hoo-hoo," 3 times. The old woman looked up just a little. Then she said, "Now, my little daughter, it is time for thee to go out and do thy work." She rose and went out. And where did she go? Over the meadows, ever onward into the valley. At last she came to a well, with 3 old oak trees standing beside it. Meanwhile, the moon had risen large and round over the mountain, and it was so light that one could have found a needle. She removed a skin which covered her face, then bent down to the well, and began to wash herself. When she had finished, she dipped the skin also in the water, and then laid it on the meadow, so that it should bleach in the moonlight and dry again. But how the maiden was changed! Such a change as that was never seen before. When the gray mask fell off, her golden hair broke forth like sunbeams, and spread about like a mantle over her whole form. Her eyes shone out as brightly as the stars in heaven, and her cheeks bloomed a soft red-like apple blossom. But the fair maiden was sad. She sat down and wept bitterly. One tear after another forced itself out of her eyes, and rolled through her long hair to the ground. There she sat, and would have remained sitting a long time, if there had not been a rustling and crackling in the boughs of the neighboring tree. She sprang up like a roe which has been overtaken by the shot of the hunter. Just then, the moon was obscured by a dark cloud, and in an instant the maiden had put on the old skin and vanished, like a light brown out by the wind. She ran back home, trembling like an aspen leaf. The old woman was standing on the threshold, and the girl was about to relate what had befallen her. But the old woman laughed kindly and said, "I already know all." She led her into the room and lighted a new log. She did not, however, sit down to her spinning again, but fetched a broom and began to sweep and scour. "All must be clean and sweet," she said to the girl. "But, mother," said the maiden, "why do you begin to work at so late an hour?" "What do you expect? Dost thou know, then, what time it is?" asked the old woman. "Not yet midnight," answered the maiden, "but already past 11 o'clock. "Dost thou not remember," continued the old woman, "that it is 3 years to-day since thou camest to me? Thou time is up. We can no longer remain together." The girl was terrified, and said, "Alas, dear mother, will you cast me off? Where shall I go? I have no friends and no home to which I can go. I have always done as you bade me, and you have always been satisfied with me. Do not send me away." The old woman would not tell the maiden what lay before her. "My stay here is over," she said to her, "but when I depart, house and parlor must be clean. Therefore do not hinder me in my work. Have no care for thyself. Thou shalt find a roof to shelter thee, and the wages which I will give thee shall also content thee." "But tell me what is about to happen," the maiden continued to entreat. "I tell thee again, do not hinder me in my work. Do not say a word more. Go to thy chamber, take the skin off thy face, and put on the silken gown which thou hadst on when thou camest to me, and then wait in thy chamber until I call thee." But I must once more tell of the king and queen, who had journeyed forth with the count in order to seek out the old woman in the wilderness. The count had strayed away from them in the wood by night, and had to walk onward alone. Next day, it seemed to him that he was on the right track. He still went forward until darkness came on. Then he climbed a tree, intending to pass the night there, for he feared that he might lose his way. When the moon illuminated the surrounding country, he perceived a figure coming down the mountain. She had no stick in her hand, but yet he could see that it was the goose girl, whom he had seen before in the house of the old woman. "Oh ho!" cried he. "There she comes, and if I once get hold of one of the witches, the other shall not escape me." But how astonished he was when she went to the well, took off her skin and washed herself, when her golden hair fell down all about her, and she was more beautiful than any one whom he had ever seen in the whole world. He hardly dared to breathe, but stretched his head as far forward through the leaves as he dared, and stared at her. Either he bent over too far, or whatever the cause might be, the bow suddenly cracked, and that very moment the maiden slipped into the skin, sprang away like a roe, and as the moon was suddenly covered, disappeared from his eyes. Hardly had she disappeared before the count descended from the tree, and hastened after her with nimble steps. He had not been gone long before he saw, in the twilight, two figures coming over the meadow. It was the king and queen, who had perceived from a distance the light shining in the old woman's little house, and were going to it. The count told them what wonderful things he had seen by the well, and they did not doubt that it had been their lost daughter. They walked onwards full of joy, and soon came to the little house. The geese were sitting all round it, and had thrust their heads under their wings, and were sleeping, and not one of them moved. The king and queen looked in at the window. The old woman was sitting there quite quietly spinning, nodding her head and never looking round. The room was perfectly clean, as if the little mist men who carry no dust on their feet lived there. Their daughter, however, they did not see. They gazed at all this for a long time. At last they took heart, punished by the misery in which you have lived. Then she went to the chamber and called, "Come out, my little daughter." Thereupon the door opened, and the princess stepped out in her silken garments, with her golden hair and her shining eyes, and it was as if an angel from heaven had entered. She went up to her father and mother, fell on their necks, and kissed them. There was no help for it. They all had to weep for joy. The young count stood near them, and when she perceived him, she became as red in the face as a moss rose. She herself did not know why. The king said, "My dear child, I have given away my kingdom. What shall I give thee?" "She needs nothing," said the old woman. "I give her the tears that she has wept on your account. They are precious pearls, finer than those that are found in the sea, and worth more than your whole kingdom. And I give her my little house as payment for her services." When the old woman had said that, she disappeared from their sight. The walls rattled a little, and when the king and queen looked round, the little house had changed into a splendid palace. A royal table had been spread, and the servants were running hither and thither. The story goes still further, but my grandmother, who related it to me, had partly lost her memory, and had forgotten the rest. I shall always believe that the beautiful princess married the count, and that they remained together in the palace, and lived there in all happiness so long as God willed it. Whether the snow-white geese, which were kept near the little hut, were verily young maidens, no need to take offense, whom the old woman had taken under her protection, and whether they now received their human form again, and stayed as handmaids to the young queen, I do not exactly know, but I suspect it. This much is certain, that the old woman was no witch, as people thought, but a wise woman who meant very well. Very likely it was she who at the princess's birth gave her the gift of weeping pearls instead of tears. That does not happen nowadays, or else the poor would soon become rich. The White Bride and the Black One. A woman was going about the unclosed land with her daughter and her stepdaughter cutting fodder, when the Lord came walking towards them in the form of a poor man, and asked, "Which is the way into the village?" "If you want to know," said the mother, "seek it for yourself." And the daughter added, "If you are afraid you will not find it, take a guide with you." But the stepdaughter said, "Poor man, I will take you there. Come with me." Then God was angry with the mother and daughter, and turned his back on them, and wished that they should become as black as night, and as ugly as sin. To the poor stepdaughter, however, God was gracious, and went with her, and when they were near the village, he said a blessing over her, and spoke, "Choose 3 things for thyself, and I will grant them to thee." Then said the maiden, "I should like to be as beautiful and fair as the sun." And instantly she was white and fair as day. "Then I should like to have a purse of money which would never grow empty." That the Lord gave her also, but he said, "Do not forget what is best of all." Said she, "For my 3rd wish, I desire after my death to inhabit the eternal kingdom of heaven." That also was granted unto her, and then the Lord left her. When the stepmother came home with her daughter, and they saw that they were both as black as coal and ugly, but that the stepdaughter was white and beautiful, wickedness increased still more in their hearts, and they thought of nothing else but how they could do her an injury. The stepdaughter, however, had a brother called Reginer, whom she loved much, and she told him all that had happened. Once on a time Reginer said to her, "Dear sister, I will take thy likeness, that I may continually see thee before mine eyes, for my love for thee is so great that I should like always to look at thee." Then she answered, "But I pray thee, let not one see the picture." So he painted his sister and hung up the picture in his room. He, however, dwelt in the king's palace, for he was his coachman. Every day he went and stood before the picture, and thanked God for the happiness of having such a dear sister. Now it happened that the king whom he served had just lost his wife, who had been so beautiful that no one could be found to compare with her, and on this account the king was in deep grief. The attendants about the court, however, remarked that the coachman stood daily before this beautiful picture, and they were jealous of him, so they informed the king. Then the latter ordered the picture to be brought to him, and when he saw that it was like his lost wife in every respect, except that it was still more beautiful, he fell mortally in love with it. He caused the coachman to be brought before him, and asked whom the portrait represented. The coachman said it was his sister, so the king resolved to take no one but her as his wife, and gave him a carriage and horses and splendid garments of cloth of gold, and sent him forth to fetch his chosen bride. When Reginer came on this errand, his sister was glad, but the black maiden was jealous of her good fortune, and grew angry above all measure, and said to her mother, "Of what use are all your arts to us now, when you cannot procure such a piece of luck for me?" "Be quiet," said the old woman. "I will soon divert it to you." And by her arts of witchcraft, she so troubled the eyes of the coachman that he was half blind, and she stopped the ears of the white maidens so that she was half deaf. Then they got into the carriage, first the bride in her noble royal apparel, then the stepmother with her daughter, and Reginer sat on the box to drive. When they had been on the way for some time, the coachman cried, "Cover thee well, my sister dear, that the rain may not wet thee, that the wind may not load thee with dust, that thou mayest be fair and beautiful when thou appearest before the king." The bride asked, "What is my dear brother saying?" "Ah," said the old woman, "he says that you ought to take off your golden dress and give it to your sister." Then she took it off and put it on the black maiden, who gave her in exchange for it a shabby gray gown. They drove onward, and a short time afterward the brother again cried, "Cover thee well, my sister dear, that the rain may not wet thee, that the wind may not load thee with dust, that thou mayest be fair and beautiful when thou appearest before the king." The bride asked, "What is my dear brother saying?" "Ah," said the old woman, "he says that you ought to take off your golden hood and give it to your sister." So she took off the hood and put it on her sister, and sat with her own head uncovered. And they drove on farther. After a while, the brother once more cried, "Cover thee well, my sister dear, that the rain may not wet thee, that the wind may not load thee with dust, that thou mayest be fair and beautiful when thou appearest before the king." The bride asked, "What is my dear brother saying?" "Ah," said the old woman, "he says you must look out of the carriage." They were, however, just on a bridge, which crossed deep water. When the bride stood up and leant forward out of the carriage, they both pushed her out, and she fell into the middle of the water. At the same moment that she sank, a snow-white duck arose out of the mirror smooth water and swam down the river. The brother had observed nothing of it, and drove the carriage on until they reached the court. Then he took the black maiden to the king as his sister, and thought she really was so, because his eyes were dim, and he saw the golden garments glittering. When the king saw the boundless ugliness of his intended bride, he was very angry and ordered the coachman to be thrown into a pit, which was full of adders and nests of snakes. The old witch, however, knew so well how to flatter the king and deceive his eyes by her arts, that he kept her and her daughter until she appeared quite endurable to him, and he really married her. One evening, when the black bride was sitting on the king's knee, a white duck came swimming up the gutter to the kitchen, and said to the kitchen boy, "Boy, light a fire that I may warm my feathers." The kitchen boy did it, and lighted a fire on the hearth. Then came the duck and sat down by it, and shook herself and smoothed her feathers to rights with her bill. While she was thus sitting and enjoying herself, she asked, "What is my brother Reginer doing?" The scullery boy replied, "He is imprisoned in the pit with adders and with snakes." Then she asked, "What is the black witch doing in the house?" The boy answered, "She is loved by the king and happy." "May God have mercy on him," said the duck, and swam forth by the sink. The next night she came again and put the same questions, and the third night also. Then the kitchen boy could bear it no longer, and went to the king and discovered all to him. The king, however, wanted to see it for himself, and next evening went thither, and when the duck thrust her head in through the sink, he took his sword and cut through her neck, and suddenly she changed into a most beautiful maiden, exactly like the picture which her brother had made of her. The king was full of joy, and as she stood there quite wet, he caused splendid apparel to be brought and had her clothed in it. Then she told how she had been betrayed by cunning and falsehood, and at last thrown down into the water, and her first request was that her brother should be brought forth from the pit of snakes. And when the king had fulfilled this request, he went into the chamber where the old witch was, and asked, "What does she deserve who does this and that?" and related what had happened. Then was she so blinded that she was aware of nothing, and said, "She deserves to be stripped naked and put into a barrel with nails, and that a horse should be harnessed to the barrel, and the horse sent all over the world." All of which was done to her, and to her black daughter. But the king married the white and beautiful bride, and rewarded her faithful brother, and made him a rich and distinguished man. The Little Brother and Little Sister. Little brother took his little sister by the hand and said, "Since our mother died, we have had no happiness. Our stepmother beats us every day, and if we come near her, she kicks us away with her foot. Our meals are the hard crusts of bread that are left over, and the little dog under the table is better off, for she often throws it a nice bit. May heaven pity us, if our mother only knew. Come, we will go forth together into the wide world." They walked the whole day over meadows, fields, and stony places, and when it rained, the little sister said, "Heaven and our hearts are weeping together." In the evening, they came to a large forest, and they were so weary with sorrow and hunger and the long walk that they lay down in a hollow tree and fell asleep. The next day when they awoke, the sun was already high in the sky and shone down hot into the tree. Then the brother said, "Sister, I am thirsty. If I knew of a little brook, I would go and just take a drink. I think I hear one running." The brother got up and took the little sister by the hand, and they set off to find the brook. But the wicked stepmother was a witch, and had seen how the two children had gone away, and had crept after them privily, as witches do creep, and had bewitched all the brooks in the forest. Now when they found a little brook leaping brightly over the stones, the brother was going to drink out of it, but the sister heard how it said as it ran, "Who drinks of me will be a tiger. Who drinks of me will be a tiger." Then the sister cried, "Pray, dear brother, do not drink, or you will become a wild beast and tear me to pieces." The brother did not drink, although he was so thirsty, but said, "I will wait for the next spring." When they came to the next brook, the sister heard this also say, "Who drinks of me will be a wolf. Who drinks of me will be a wolf." Then the sister cried out, "Pray, dear brother, do not drink, or you will become a wolf and devour me." The brother did not drink and said, "I will wait until we come to the next spring, but then I must drink. Say what you like, for my thirst is too great." And when they came to the third brook, the sister heard how it said as it ran, "Who drinks of me will be a roebuck. Who drinks of me will be a roebuck." The sister said, "Oh, I pray you, dear brother, do not drink, or you will become a roebuck and run away from me." But the brother had knelt down at once by the brook, and had bent down and drunk some of the water. And as soon as the first drops touched his lips, he lay there a young roebuck. And now the sister wept over her poor bewitched brother, and the little roe wept also, and sat sorrowfully near to her. But at last the girl said, "Be quiet, dear little roe. I will never, never leave you." Then she united her golden garter and put it round the roebuck's neck, and she plucked rushes and wove them into a soft cord. With this she tied the little beast and led it on, and she walked deeper and deeper into the forest. And when they had gone a very long way, they came at last to a little house, and the girl looked in, and as it was empty, she thought, "We can stay here and live." Then she sought 4 leaves and moss to make a soft bed for the roe, and every morning she went out and gathered roots and berries and nuts for herself, and brought tender grass for the roe, who ate out of her hand, and was content and played round about her. In the evening, when the sister was tired, and had said her prayers, she laid her head upon the roebuck's back. That was her pillow, and she slept softly on it. And if only the brother had had his human form, it would have been a delightful life. For some time they were alone like this in the wilderness. But it happened that the king of the country held a great hunt in the forest. Then the blasts of the horns, the barking of dogs, and the merry shouts of the huntsmen rang through the trees. And the roebuck heard all, and was only too anxious to be there. "Oh," said he to his sister, "let me be off to the hunt. I cannot bear it any longer." And he begged so much that at last she agreed. "But," said she to him, "come back to me in the evening. I must shut my door for fear of the rough huntsman. So knock and say, 'My little sister, let me in, that I may know of you.' And if you do not say that, I shall not open the door." Then the young roebuck sprang away. So happy was he and so merry in the open air. The king and the huntsmen saw the pretty creature, and started after him, but they could not catch him, and when they thought that they surely had him, away he sprang through the bushes, and could not be seen. When it was dark, he ran to the cottage, knocked, and said, "My little sister, let me in." Then the door was opened for him, and he jumped in and rested himself the whole night through upon his soft bed. The next day the hunt went on afresh, and when the roebuck again heard the bugle horn, and the ho, ho, ho of the huntsman, he had no peace, but said, "Sister, let me out, I must be off." His sister opened the door for him and said, "But you must be here again in the evening and say your password." When the king and his huntsmen again saw the young roebuck with the golden collar, they all chased him, but he was too quick and nimble for them. This went on for the whole day, but at last by the evening the huntsmen had surrounded him, and one of them wounded him a little in the foot, so that he limped and ran slowly. Then a hunter crept after him to the cottage and heard how he said, "My little sister, let me in," and saw that the door was opened for him, and was shut again at once. The huntsman took notice of it all, and went to the king and told him what he had seen and heard. Then the king said, "Tomorrow we will hunt once more." The little sister, however, was dreadfully frightened when she saw that her fawn was hurt. She washed the blood off him, laid herbs on the wound, and said, "Go to your bed, dear roe, that you may get well again." But the wound was so slight that the roebuck next morning did not feel it any more, and when he again heard the sport outside, he said, "I cannot bear it. I must be there. They shall not find it so easy to catch me." The sister cried and said, "This time they will kill you, and here am I alone in the forest and forsaken by all the world. I will not let you out." "Then you will have me die of grief," answered the roe. "When I hear the bugle horns, I feel as if I must jump out of my skin." Then the sister could not do otherwise, but opened the door for him with a heavy heart, and the roebuck, full of health and joy, bounded into the forest. When the king saw him, he said to his huntsman, "Now chase him all day long till nightfall, but take care that no one does him any harm." As soon as the sun had set, the king said to the huntsman, "Now come and show me the cottage in the wood." And when he was at the door, he knocked and called out, "Dear little sister, let me in." Then the door opened, and the king walked in. and there stood a maiden more lovely than any he had ever seen. The maiden was frightened when she saw, not her little roe, but a man come in who wore a golden crown upon his head. But the king looked kindly at her, stretched out his hand, and said, "Will you go with me to my palace, and be my dear wife?" "Yes, indeed," answered the maiden. "But the little roe must go with me. I cannot leave him." The king said, "It shall stay with you as long as you live, and shall want nothing." Just then he came running in, and the sister again tied him with the cord of rushes, took it in her own hand, and went away with the king from the cottage. The king took the lovely maiden upon his horse, and carried her to his palace, where the wedding was held with great pomp. She was now the queen, and they lived for a long time happily together. The roebuck was tended and cherished, and ran about in the palace garden. But the wicked stepmother, because of whom the children had gone out into the world, thought all the time that the sister had been torn to pieces by the wild beasts in the wood, and that the brother had been shot for a roebuck by the huntsman. Now, when she heard that they were so happy and so well off, envy and hatred rose in her heart and left her no peace, and she thought of nothing but how she could bring them again to misfortune. Her own daughter, who was ugly as night and had only one eye, grumbled at her and said, "A queen? That ought to have been my luck." "Only be quiet," answered the old woman, and comforted her by saying, "When the time comes, I shall be ready." As time went on, the queen had a pretty little boy, and it happened that the king was out hunting. So the old witch took the form of the chambermaid, went into the room where the queen lay, and said to her, "Come, the bath is ready. It will do you good and give you fresh strength. Make haste before it gets cold." The daughter also was close by, so they carried the weakly queen into the bathroom and put her into the bath. Then they shut the door and ran away. But in the bathroom they had made a fire of such deadly heat that the beautiful young queen was soon suffocated. When this was done, the old woman took her daughter, put a nightcap on her, and laid her in bed in place of the queen. She gave her to the shape and the look of the queen, only she could not make good the lost eye. But in order that the king might not see it, she was to lie on the side on which she had no eye. In the evening, when he came home and heard that he had a son, he was heartily glad, and was going to the bed of his dear wife to see how she was. But the old woman quickly called out, "For your life, leave the curtains closed. The queen ought not to see the light yet, and must have rest." The king went away, and did not find out that a false queen was lying in the bed. But at midnight, when all slept, the nurse, who was sitting in the nursery by the cradle, and who was the only person awake, saw the door open and the true queen walk in. She took the child out of the cradle, laid it on her arm, and suckled it. Then she shook up its pillow, laid the child down again, and covered it with the little quilt. And she did not forget the roebuck, but went into the corner where it lay and stroked its back. Then she went quite silently out of the door again. The next morning the nurse asked the guards whether anyone had come into the palace during the night, but they answered, "No, we have seen no one." She came thus many nights and never spoke a word. The nurse always saw her, but she did not dare to tell anyone about it. When some time had passed in this manner, the queen began to speak in the night and said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? Twice shall I come, then never more." The nurse did not answer, but when the queen had gone again, went to the king and told him all. The king said, "Ah, heavens! What is this? Tomorrow night I will watch by the child." In the evening he went into the nursery, And at midnight the queen again appeared and said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? Once will I come, then never more." And she nursed the child, as she was wont to do before she disappeared. The king dared not speak to her, but on the next night he watched again. Then she said, "How fares my child? How fares my roe? This time I come, then never more." Then the king could not restrain himself. He sprang towards her and said, "You can be none other than my dear wife." She answered, "Yes, I am your dear wife." And at the same moment she received life again, and by God's grace became fresh, rosy, and full of health. Then she told the king the evil deed which the wicked witch and her daughter had been guilty of towards her. The king ordered both to be led before the judge, and judgment was delivered against them. The daughter was taken into the forest, where she was torn to pieces by wild beasts. But the witch was cast into the fire, and miserably burnt. And as soon as she was burnt, the roebuck changed his shape, and received his human form again. So the sister and brother lived happily together all their lives. The Gold Children. There was once a poor man and a poor woman who had nothing but a little cottage, and who earned their bread by fishing, and always lived from hand to mouth. But it came to pass one day, when the man was sitting by the waterside and casting his net, that he drew out a fish entirely of gold. As he was looking at the fish, full of astonishment, it began to speak and said, "Hark you, fisherman, if you will throw me back again into the water, I will change your little hut into a splendid castle." Then the fisherman answered, "Of what use is a castle to me if I have nothing to eat?" The goldfish continued, "That shall be taken care of. There will be a cupboard in the castle in which, when you open it, shall be dishes of the most delicate meats, and as many of them as you can desire." "If that be true," said the man, "then I can well do you a favor." "Yes," said the fish. "There is, however, the condition that you shall disclose to no one in the world, whosoever he may be, whence your good luck has come. If you speak but one single word, all will be over." Then the man threw the wonderful fish back again into the water and went home. But where his hovel had formerly stood, now stood a great castle. He opened wide his eyes, entered, and saw his wife dressed in beautiful clothes, sitting in a splendid room, and she was quite delighted and said, "Husband, how has all this come to pass? It suits me very well." "Yes," said the man, "it suits me too, but I am frightfully hungry. Just give me something to eat." Said the wife, "But I have got nothing and don't know where to find anything in this new house." "There is no need of your knowing," said the man, "for I see yonder a great cupboard. Just unlock it." When she opened it, there stood cakes, meat, fruit, wine, quite a bright prospect. Then the woman cried joyfully, "What more can you want, my dear?" And they sat down and ate and drank together. When they had had enough, the woman said, "But husband, whence come all these riches?" "Alas," answered he, "do not question me about it, for I dare not tell you anything. If I disclose it to anyone, then all our good fortune will fly." "Very good," said she. "If I am not to know anything, then I do not want to know anything." However, she was not in earnest. She never rested day or night, and she goaded her husband until, in his impatience, he revealed that all was owing to a wonderful golden fish, which he had caught, and to which in return he had given its liberty. And as soon as the secret was out, the splendid castle, with the cupboard, immediately disappeared, They were once more in the old fisherman's hut, and the man was obliged to follow his former trade and fish. But fortune would so have it that he once more drew out the golden fish. "Listen," said the fish, "if you will throw me back into the water again, I will once more give you the castle with the cupboard full of roast and boiled meats. Only be firm, for your life's sake don't reveal from whom you have it, or you will lose it all again." "I will take good care," answered the fisherman, and threw the fish back into the water. Now at home, everything was once more in its former magnificence, and the wife was overjoyed at their good fortune, but curiously left her no peace, so that after a couple of days she began to ask again how it had come to pass, and how he had managed to secure it. The man kept silent for a short time, but at last she made him so angry that he broke out, and betrayed the secret. In an instant the castle disappeared, and they were back again in their old hut. "Now you got what you want," said he, "and we can gnaw at a bare bone again." "Ah," said the woman, "I had rather not have riches if I am to not know from whom they come, for then I have no peace." The man went back to fish, and after a while he chanced to draw out the golden fish for a third time. "Listen," said the fish, "I see very well that I am fated to fall into your hands. Take me home and cut me into 6 pieces. Give your wife 2 of them to eat, 2 to your horse, and bury 2 of them in the ground. Then they will bring you a blessing." The fisherman took the fish home with him, and did as it had bidden him. It came to pass, however, that from the 2 pieces that were buried in the ground, 2 golden lilies sprang up, that the horse had 2 golden foals, and the fisherman's wife bore 2 children who were made entirely of gold. The children grew up, became tall and handsome, and the lilies and horses grew likewise. Then they said, "Father, we want to mount our golden steeds and travel out in the world." But he answered sorrowfully, "How shall I bear it if you go away, and I know not how it fares with you?" Then they said, "The 2 golden lilies remain here. By them you can see how it is with us. If they are fresh, then we are in health. If they are withered, we are ill. If they perish, then we are dead." So they rode forth and came to an inn, in which were many people, and when they perceived the golden children, they began to laugh and jeer. When one of them heard the mocking, he felt ashamed and would not go out into the world, but turned back and went home again to his father. But the other rode forward and reached a great forest. As he was about to enter it, the people said, "It is not safe for you to ride through. The wood is full of robbers who would treat you badly. You will fare ill, and when they see that you are all of gold, and your horse likewise, they will assuredly kill you." But he would not allow himself to be frightened, and said, "I must, and will ride through it." Then he took bear skins and covered himself and his horse with them, so that the gold was no more to be seen, and rode fearlessly into the forest. When he had ridden onward a little, he heard a rustling in the bushes, and heard voices speaking together. From one side came cries of, "There is one!" But from the other, "Let him go. 'Tis an idle fellow, as poor and bare as a church mouse. What should we gain from him?" So the gold child rode joyfully through the forest, and no evil befell him. One day he entered a village, wherein he saw a maiden, who was so beautiful that he did not believe that any more beautiful than she existed in the world. And as such a mighty love took possession of him, he went up to her and said, "I love thee with my whole heart. Wilt thou be my wife?" He too pleased the maiden so much that she agreed and said, "Yes, I will be thy wife, and be true to thee my whole life long." Then they were married, and just as they were in the greatest happiness, home came the father of the bride, And when he saw that his daughter's wedding was being celebrated, he was astonished and said, "Where is the bridegroom?" They showed him the gold child, who however still wore his bare skins. Then the father said wrathfully, "A vagabond shall never have my daughter," and was about to kill him. Then the bride begged as hard as she could and said, "He is my husband, and I love him with all my heart," until at last he allowed himself to be appeased. Nevertheless, the idea never left his thoughts, so that next morning he rose early, wishing to see whether his daughter's husband was a common ragged beggar. But when he peeped in, he saw a magnificent golden man in the bed, and the cast-off bare skin lying on the ground. Then he went back and thought, "What a good thing it was that I restrained my anger. I should have committed a great crime." But the gold child dreamed that he rode out to hunt a splendid stag, and when he awoke in the morning, he said to his wife, "I must go hunting." She was uneasy and begged him to stay there and said, "You might easily meet with a great misfortune." But he answered, "I must and will go." Thereupon he got up and rode forth into the forest, and it was not long before a fine stag crossed his path, exactly according to his dream. He aimed and was about to shoot it when the stag ran away. He gave chase over hedges and ditches for the whole day without feeling tired. But in the evening the stag vanished from his sight, and when the gold child looked round him, he was standing before a little house, wherein was a witch. He knocked, and a little old woman came out and asked, "What are you doing so late in the mists of the great forest?" "Have you not seen a stag?" "Yes," answered she, "I know the stag well." And thereupon a little dog which had come out of the house with her barked at the man violently. "Wilt thou be silent, thou odious toad?" said he, "or I will shoot thee dead." Then the witch cried out in a passion, "What? Will you slay my little dog?" and immediately transformed him, so that he lay like a stone, and his bride awaited him in vain and thought, "That which I so greatly dreaded, which lay so heavily on my heart, has come upon him." But at home the other brother was standing by the gold lilies, when one of them suddenly drooped. "Good heavens," said he, "my brother has met with some great misfortune. I must away to see if I can possibly rescue him." Then the father said, "Stay here. If I lose you also, what shall I do?" But he answered, "I must and will go forth." Then he mounted his golden horse, and rode forth and entered the great forest, where his brother lay turned to stone. The old witch came out of her house and called him, wishing to entrap him also, but he did not go near her, and said, "I will shoot you if you will not bring my brother to life again." She touched the stone, though very unwillingly, with her forefinger, and he was immediately restored to his human shape. But the two gold children rejoiced when they saw each other again, kissed and caressed each other, and rode away together out of the forest, the one home to his bride, and the other to his father. The father then said, "I knew well that you had rescued your brother, for the golden lily suddenly rose up and blossomed out again." Then they lived happily, and all prospered with them until their death. The Golden Goose. There was a man who had 3 sons, the youngest of whom was called the Simpleton, and was despised, laughed at, and neglected on every occasion. It happened one day that the eldest son wished to go into the forest to cut wood, and before he went his mother gave him a delicious pancake and a flask of wine, that he might not suffer from hunger or thirst. When he came into the forest, a little old gray man met him, who wished him good day, and said, Give me a bit of cake out of your pocket, and let me have a drink of your wine. I am so hungry and thirsty." But the prudent youth answered, "Give you my cake and my wine. I haven't got any. Be off with you." And leaving the little man standing there, he went off. Then he began to fell a tree, but he had not been at it long before he made a wrong stroke, and the hatchet hit him in the arm, so that he was obliged to go home and get it bound up. That was what came of the little gray man. Afterwards, the second son went into the wood, and the mother gave to him, as to the eldest, a pancake and a flask of wine. The little old gray man met him also, and begged for a little bit of cake and a drink of wine. But the second son spoke out plainly, saying, "What I give you I lose myself, so be off with you." And leaving the little man standing there, he went off. The punishment followed. As he was chopping away at the tree, he hit himself in the leg so severely that he had to be carried home. Then said the simpleton, "Father, let me go for once into the forest to cut wood." And the father answered, "Your brothers have hurt themselves by so doing. Give it up. You understand nothing about it." But the simpleton went on begging so long that the father said at last, "Well, be off with you. You will only learn by experience." The mother gave him a cake. It was only made with water and baked in the ashes, and with it a flask of sour beer. When he came into the forest, the little old gray man met him and greeted him, saying, "Give me a bit of your cake and a drink from your flask. I am so hungry and thirsty." And the simpleton answered, "I have only a flour and water cake and sour beer. But if that is good enough for you, let us sit down together and eat." Then they sat down, and as the simpleton took out his flour and water cake, it became a rich pancake, and his sour beer became good wine. Then they ate and drank, and afterwards the little man said, "As you have such a kind heart, and shared what you have so willingly, I will bestow good luck upon you. Yonder stands an old tree. Cut it down, and at its roots you will find something." And thereupon the little man took his departure. The simpleton went there, and hewed away at the tree, and when it fell he saw, sitting among the roots, a goose with feathers of pure gold. He lifted it out and took it with him to an inn where he intended to stay the night. The landlord had 3 daughters, who when they saw the goose were curious to know what wonderful kind of bird it was, and ended by longing for one of its golden feathers. The eldest thought, "I will wait for a good opportunity, and then I will pull out one of its feathers for myself." And so, when the simpleton was gone out, she seized the goose by its wing, but there her finger and hand had to stay, held fast. Soon after came the second sister with the same idea of plucking out one of the golden feathers for herself. But scarcely had she touched her sister than she also was obliged to stay, held fast. Lastly came the third with the same intentions, but the others screamed out, "Stay away! For heaven's sake, stay away!" But she did not see why she would stay away, and thought, "If they do so, why should not I?" and went towards them. But when she reached her sisters, there she stopped, hanging on with them, and so they had to stay all night. The next morning, the simpleton took the goose under his arm and went away, unmindful of the 3 girls that hung on to it. The 3 had to run after him, left and right, wherever his legs carried him. In the midst of the fields, they met the parson, who, when he saw the procession, said, "Shame on you, girls, running after a young fellow through the fields like this." And forthwith he seized hold of the youngest by the hand to drag her away. But hardly had he touched her, when he too was obliged to run after them himself. Not long after, the sexton came that way, and seeing the respected parson following at the heels of the three girls, he called out, "Ho, your reverence, whither away so quickly? You forget that we have another christening today." And he seized hold of him by his gown, but no sooner had he touched him than he was obliged to follow on too. As the five tramped on, one after another, two peasants with their hoes came up from the fields, and the parson cried out to them and begged them to come and set him and the sexton free. But no sooner had they touched the sexton than they had to follow on too. And now there were 7 following the simpleton and the goose. By and by they came to a town where a king reigned, who had an only daughter who was so serious that no one could make her laugh. Therefore the king had given out that whoever should make her laugh should have her in marriage. The simpleton, when he heard this, went with his goose and his hangers on into the presence of the king's daughter. And as soon as she saw the 7 people following, always one after the other, she burst out laughing, and seemed as if she could never stop. And so the simpleton earned a right to her as his bride. But the king did not like him for a son-in-law, and made all kinds of objections, and said he must first bring a man who could drink up a whole cellar of wine. The simpleton thought that the little gray man would be able to help him, and went out into the forest, and there, on the very spot where he felled the tree, he saw a man sitting with a very sad countenance. The simpleton asked him what was the matter, and he answered, "I have a great thirst, which I cannot quench. Cold water does not agree with me. I have indeed drunk up a whole cask of wine, but what good is a drop like that?" Then said the simpleton, "I can help you. Only come with me, and you shall have enough." He took him straight to the king's cellar, and the man sat himself down before the big vats, and drank, and before a day was over, he had drunk up the whole cellar full. The simpleton again asked for his bride, but the king was annoyed that a wretched fellow, called the simpleton by everybody, should carry off his daughter, and so he made new conditions. He was to produce a man who could eat up a mountain of bread. The simpleton did not hesitate long, but ran quickly off to the forest, and there in the same place sat a man who had fastened a strap round his body, making a very piteous face, and saying, "I have eaten a whole bakehouse full of rolls, but what is the use of that when one is so hungry as I am? My stomach feels quite empty, and I am obliged to strap myself together, that I may not die of hunger." The simpleton was quite glad of this, and said, "Get up quickly and come along with me, and you shall have enough to eat." He led him straight to the king's courtyard, where all the meal in the kingdom had been collected and baked into a mountain of bread. The man out of the forest settled himself down before it, and hastened to eat, and in one day the whole mountain had disappeared. Then the simpleton asked for his bride the 3rd time. The king, however, found one more excuse, and said he must have a ship that should be able to sail on land or on water. "So soon," said he, "as you come sailing along with it, you shall have my daughter for your wife." The simpleton went straight to the forest, and there sat the little old gray man with whom he had shared his cake, and he said, "I have eaten for you, and I have drunk for you. I will also give you the ship, and all because you were kind to me at the first." Then he gave the ship that could sail on land and on water, and when the king saw it, he knew that he could no longer withhold his daughter. The marriage took place immediately, and at the death of the king, the simpleton possessed the kingdom, and lived long and happily with his wife.